Hi all. As he said, Tail, David Lawrence on the slide though, same person, long backstory, catch me in a beer sometime, or scotch. I am an architect with Salesforce, but this is presenting on work that a group of us are doing for the IETF in a new way to handle delegations in the DNS. So, you in this room are already very familiar with the iterative process of looking up DNS names. You start with the root and get a delegation from the root, and that will tell you, in this example, to go talk to the UK name servers, which will tell you to talk to the co.uk name servers, and finally you can talk to the example.co.uk name servers, who will hopefully give you an answer, but it's turtles all the way down. The only thing that a DNS resolver can really expect is that it has all it has is a name. So all it knows is that the next name that it talks to should be running DNS on a UDP port 53. This was one of the things I had in the original draft that somebody changed to UDP and TCP, but despite the existence of a internet standard that says TCP is not optional, we have all seen that the only thing that a resolver can really expect to find is a UDP name server at the next turtle down. But what if the turtle could tell you, oh, this one is different. I want you to go talk to a different name server that works differently. You're switching from turtles to tigers, right? Like you have an enhanced name server that's going to be able to give you some aspect of better service for resolving your query. So introducing DELEG. This is a sample master file record for how DELEG would work. And that's it, we're done. We'll expect to see this rolled out in name servers any day now, and just start using it. There is more to it, but first I want to clarify something about metaphor. There are a few different aspects of this, as been pointed out. Well, the tigers are supposed to be supported on the backs of elephants, and I had no elephants to spare. And also, some people, including Ben, who introduced me, have pointed out, well, it's upside down, really, because if you're supposed to support everything from the root, well, you're right about that. More significantly, I don't think the turtle versus tiger comparison is really that fair. I believe Paul Makapetris is in the room. I do not mean to insult your protocol, because in fact, the DNS has been quite amazing, right? Turtles is not a great representation for this. It's only great for the idea of iteration through turtles all the way down. But the DNS is fast. It is resilient. It has been, the most successful internet protocol aside from IPv4 itself over the past, 40 years. So we are very happy with it. But that kind of resiliency, I didn't really want to go with the cockroach metaphor. Little bit of history of how we got here with DELEG. Petr Spacek had convened a brainstorming session at the previous IETF in Prague. Saying essentially, we have a number of little things that we all dislike about the protocol that we would really like to refine to scale as the internet continues to grow. So if you were to wish big on being able to change the protocol, how would you do that? Some of you may have heard your company executives talk about BHAGs, a big, hairy, audacious goal. Like if we really wanted to change things, how could we go about that? One of the things that we quickly coalesced on was, even though we had all these different things we want to fix, the main thing was, well, how do you get resolvers to start using that? And so to get success in that area, we quickly identified that we really needed a low friction way that was incrementally deployable, and it wasn't going to break the legacy DNS, or break might even be, if it provided additional friction in the legacy DNS, that would really work against it. So how could we let resolvers know that they were going to talk, to do a better new way of doing things? And maybe we could use eDNS. That was one of the reasons eDNS first came out, right? Or maybe we could use globally scoped special names and an additional lookup to get there. Well, this is where DELEG came in. We independently reinvented a proposal that Tim April had made very early on in the COVID pandemic. And so it didn't get a lot of traction, unfortunately, because the world was in flames. But it was modeled after the new service binding record, which is now it had just been published as an RFC in November. And so the idea behind the service binding record is that you can provide a structured list of key value pairs that have defined semantic meanings in a registry to identify, extensions to the record and make it easy to have them come along. And so one of our answers might look like this. You can see that when a delegation is provided, there is both the traditional NS records to be used by the legacy name servers, the traditional DS one to be used by validating resolvers, and then a new record called DELEG, which in this particular case is showing exactly the same, the delegation to the same set of name servers. And you can even see that in this particular case, it's just being redundant, but telling new resolvers you can use this mechanism instead of the NS records. That is not a requirement. We anticipate that DELEG records would in fact provide different information than NS records. But for the purpose of example, this shows you how you would recreate the same semantics in the new record. And so some of the key features about it is, one is, and that's vital, we think, is this opportunistic discovery. You don't need a separate query to ask for, hey, for this domain, can I also find out this, the newer way of doing things? No, you just get it back as part of your normal resolution flow. Even if you're asking, your full name, not QName minimization, you go out and ask for www.example.co.uk. If .uk supports DELEG, you should be able to get a DELEG record right at that delegation at the top. It would be transparent to legacy resolvers because the delegation is still being returned with the NS record that, the new resolver doesn't have to understand this, the old resolver doesn't have to understand this new type at all. It can just go ahead and use the existing NS records. It would be also extensible. As I mentioned, the service binding registry provides a very structured way for how you can have key equals value pairs and then update that with later standards to provide new functionality. Significantly, it's also only on the parent side. One of the big complaints that has existed is that you have two different NS-RR sets at a domain cut. You have those in the parent and you have those in the child, and there's a lot of confusion that has resulted from that. The minimal implementation on authority servers is notable because we expect that authority server would be able to readily adopt this. It does need changes, unfortunately, because, to the extent that the authority server already has, even if the registry accepts it and is publishing its own that has the records, a lot of authority server implementations look and say, well, the only things that I return at a delegation point in the answer section or the authority section are going to be the NS and DS records. So you have to tell it that you need to return the DELEG records as well. But that's it. There's no additional special processing. There's nothing else that it has to stuff in the additional section, no other work, just this very basic understanding of please provide the DELEG record at the same place as you would provide an NS record. The indirection for operations management is a feature I'll get to later, but we also hope that this will address some of the issues that we have had in DNSSEC deployment, where operators are not considered kind of first-class citizens in the ICANN model, and that has made operations management difficult. And finally, it allows legacy DNS in subdelegations, and once you get shunted off to the tigers, if you have old servers in subdomains below that, you can still come back to the turtles if you like. So this indirection question is based on the idea that Service B's alias mode has, where by signifying a special priority of 0, and I'll come back late, this question of priorities is kind of separate to everything, but essentially in Service B, you can see the 0 or the 1 immediately after the DELEG RR type. And the 0 basically signifies essentially a redirection to say that, well, all of the information you need for actually resolving this name, you can get the parameters for that out of the name that follows. So this alias says, go ahead and look up config2.examples information, and it will tell you the name servers to connect to, the DS data that you're going to need to validate things. And in particular, this redirection allows the operator then to fully control the DS. Many of you are probably familiar with the problem. If you're an operator and you need to change your DS for one of your customer zones, that you have to rely on them to go talk to their registrar to get the new DS published up to the registry. We've tried to address this in a number of ways with, say, the CDS record, for example, that was standardized in the IETF. I'm using standardized loosely here because many of the things that happen in DNS-OP are standards tracked but never officially standardized. But essentially, this allows the operator full control of the DS for child zones and in order to be able to maintain the chain of trust. Also, one of the things that we would be able to do with the key value pairs, again, using the term standardized loosely, we have DNS over HTTPS, DNS over TLS, DNS over QUIC. They've all had RFCs published to tell you how to do it, but how does a resolver know how to find these servers? You can only know that you're talking to another UDP name server unless you use this special, unless you have some out-of-band information that tells you, well, I compiled a list of DOT servers and this is how I'm going to talk to them. But using essentially the service binding application layer protocol negotiation, is that the right expansion of ALPN? You can specify that, oh, well, for talking to this name server, I want you to use DNS over TLS. Oh, and here's the TLSA record you're going to need to be able to establish that connection. And then the other thing that this enables is possibly even a major version rev on the DNS that says, you're a resolver, you can talk to this name server and use a new version of the DNS protocol that perhaps does not have some of the limitations that DNS wire format has. There are a number of different ideas of things that we'd like to see unshackled from some of the bounding boxes put around us on the existing protocol format. And one of the more interesting ones that web people have been interested in is you could have a fully secured DNS push by being able, when you're talking to a name server, that is authoritative for example.com, but it wants to tell you to also, here's the address data for images.net. Well, you could imagine a protocol where these, DNS records could be pushed down the channel, DNSSEC authenticated, and you could trust them even though it wasn't originally coming from the name server that you were asking about that particular domain. So the core protocol suggestion has been submitted to the IETF right now. There is a draft that is being discussed in the DNS-OP working group. We hope to have it adopted by DNS-OP. There's a late-breaking update that there has been a new mailing list created called the DD mailing list. Those of you who are familiar with my particular personal domain, it is unrelated. I use the dd.org subdomain, just a coincidence. But so discussion right now is taking place on both DNS-OP and starting to take place on this new mailing list, which you can access all the standard places that you access IETF mailing lists. We also just had a virtual interim last week. There are some minutes published. They're kind of light. We filled the full hour discussing the proposal, though, and we expect to have a birds of a feather session in Brisbane next month. Ongoing document development is happening in Flieger's GitHub. That's Ralph Weber's GitHub directory. The core definition is there, but also the two additional drafts where we are both proposing, well, now here's how you can use DELEG to specify your ALPN to talk to different, transport name servers, and also how you can do the secure indirect delegation by enabling operators to perform DNSSEC on behalf of their clients with the appropriate rolling. Issue comments and pull requests are very welcome in the directory, and again, please participate in the discussions that are happening in the IETF lists. I will say, the next slide I'll say. On this slide I'll say, though, one of the very promising things about this, there's been a lot of energy. People have been very encouraging about this particular approach to the problem. So that long list of people, you'll see a number of different engineers from different aspects of the DNS community, including registries, registrars, operators, who are all very positive about this particular approach. I'll specifically call out Roy and Schumann, who while not authors on the draft, they did a bit of testing for us to identify that the approach is a solid idea in that this basic notion we have that this will not interfere with the legacy DNS is in fact a workable solution. And as I mentioned earlier, when we socialized this out of the DNS area initially, we did get interest from other people who are like, yeah, I could see how that would actually be really helpful to us. But we do have a lot of testing and discussion to still do. Top of mind right now is this even the right approach? A small number, but a number of DNS doyens have suggested that they are not too happy with it. I understand one who just flew into DNS-OARC from Australia, you'll get your chance in a moment, is apparently not particularly fond of the idea. And on the mailing list, also a couple of other, DNS enthusiasts, longtime contributors to the community, also are suspecting that they're not immediately comfortable with it, and that's fair. And so we're discussing those issues. One of the things that just happened yesterday at the a mini hackathon here around DELEG was that it was decided that, for a lot of the objections that have been brought up, we feel like we have solid answers to, and so we're starting an FAQ that addresses some of the, yes, we've considered this, and here's why we still think it's a better approach to do it this particular way. I myself have never been really fond of the DNS camel from the point of view of, to me, it kind of is like identifying the water is wet, right? Like, the DNS is complex, changing it is complex, we understand that. The discussions of the DNS camel never really come up with solutions other than stop developing the DNS. So, that said, it is still completely fair to bring up, is this the right engineering decision? And so we have a lot more discussion to do about that. We do need to do some more testing. As I mentioned, Shuman and Roy have done this great testing already that's confirmed that the existing major resolvers, bind, not, power DNS, unbound, can handle the existing ones will just keep working with legacy DNS even when the new unknown type is presented. They've even tested some of the major open resolvers like Cloudflare, Google, and Quad9. I don't think 4.4.2.2 was tested, but there are, of course, other DNS resolvers out there, as was pointed out in an earlier talk, and they have to be examined. Also, while we suspect that none of this would matter at all for DNS forwarders, we still kind of have to prove that out, that changing, that somehow this does not disrupt the action of DNS forwards. And then there's other questions that kind of fall into the usual bike shedding type of things. Like, I personally believe that if you wanted to use a conventional turtle resolver, that you should explicitly say in your DELEG record that this is the kind of resolver I'm talking to. Other people like it to be implicit, right, which is how it is in the draft right now. We have to still work out some of the things. Like, would there be any conditions necessarily? Do you have to signal somehow that you're a modern enough resolver by presenting an EDNS option that says, okay, I'm going to be able to handle this unknown thing. We haven't found any broken legacy resolvers yet, but maybe in this kind of idea of fingerprinting resolvers, maybe some characteristic of a resolver that is really harmed by this. But that's all speculative right now, so we don't know. And then this is also another issue that I personally feel about sideways delegation. Right now, we're trying to avoid being able to say, you've reached the example.com name servers. They want to notify you that, oh, by the way, you can also talk to the, you can talk DNS protocol version 2 to these other name servers. I think it's a useful feature to add because some TLDs are notoriously slow in deploying updates along this kind, but it's also kind of a complicating issue as far as trying to get this adopted by the community so far. So maybe that's something that gets pursued later.
Could you go back to slide 12?
I probably could.
Maybe. So just as a quick note, the buff was officially approved like a couple of hours ago as a working group forming buff. And then if you can go forward to 14, one of the things that would be useful to discuss at the buff is the whole, is this even the right approach, right? It's not we're just going to take the DELEG document and rubber stamp it. Right. There's going to be a bunch of discussion.
Right.
Great.
Shane Kerr from IBM. I do want to address the camel discussion very briefly, which is that one of the potential benefits of the DELEG approach is this sort of DNS 2.0 model where we can finally jettison a lot of the stuff, the barnacles that have grown on the protocol over the years.
All is right behind you.
Well, so I think we can witness how impossible it is to remove anything. I think it was John Dickinson who proposed that we deprecate a Q type that was not documented anywhere and is never used anywhere, but some people on the IETF list held their breath until their faces turned red, and we basically had to give up on getting rid of the most simple thing. Right. So I think this can actually make the camel slim and mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes describe the DNS as sort of half a dozen 3x5 cards with individual ideas. Like, this is the way the delegations work between zones. This is what the data types are like. This is what the names are like. And I always anticipated that what would happen is that one of those cards would get replaced. So this is sort of maybe you're on the road to doing it. I have two pieces of advice. First of all, with regard to the DNS camel, I agree it's a huge problem. Here over 40 years, we've managed to only come up with 100 ideas with these new RFCs. That's only 2.5 per year. I mean, guys, what have you been doing? There is the fact that we haven't spent the time to put together more integrated descriptions of the DNS protocol. And remember, I would advise you, especially since we're here in the Carolinas, there's the Wright brothers problem. I mean, the original DNS didn't have a lot of features that I knew about. I knew about incrementing, only sending the changes instead of sending the whole zone. But to get it off the ground, the Wright brothers did not have a drink cart or a bathroom on their plane. So my advice to you is it's sort of like you're trying.
100 years later, some of them still don't have a drink cart.
Yeah. My advice to you would be, don't go too far. Get something out there and so forth. And err on the side of simplicity, which means that I think that you'll see more adoption, or at least that was, my view at the time. Yeah. But I think it's, I like your new 3x5 card. Maybe you need to edit it some more. Maybe you need 5x7. This is a little more complicated.
Thank you, Paul.
Jumping in to echo a question from Mattermost, Chris Buxton asks, how do the address hints get validated? Are they subject to all the same protections that we currently have against glue record abuse? And in general, then, how do we think about the implications of potentially allowing zones to upload new kinds of information into the parent zone?
Right. So we. I don't think we've thought a lot about the published data from the child up to the parent right now. But I will mention that didn't make it into the slides really was that we've been looking at including DNSSEC, for the full system context, including being able to guard against, say, downgrade attacks, right? So that is another change that the signer would at least need, is to be able to indicate that, oh, there should be a DELEG here. So if you didn't get one back, then that could be a problem. And so a lot of that data, the parent side option would still be, kind of the controlling definition of how the delegation works. But as far as pulling up, data from the child to indicate it, right now, the only real way to do that would be like with the service binding declaration to say, well, here's the service binding that describes it, even if it's not available in the parent. Oh, and besides, one of the other key features is right now NS records are not signed in the parent. So not only are we providing a signal that says, oh, you expected a DELEG here, but there was no DELEG, so your answer is sus. But also the NS record that you're getting is signed, including all the IP hint data would all be signed as part of the record in the parent.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing here, which is that DELEG records are extensible, which means that after all of this is done, we can potentially define new fields, which would then be publishable into the parent zone. And now that creates a really interesting policy question of whether parents should accept records containing fields of which they have no understanding at all. That's good for extensibility and evolution, and bad for comprehensibility and maybe make some people nervous.
Hi, Dan Kriz, Sierra. You stated that you were working on breaking down some of the working group discussions and the pros and cons on this into an FAQ. Is that available currently?
So there were minutes from the hackathon. I don't know if they're public. I was emailed them, or they actually. They were dropped in the Mattermost chat. So if you're on Mattermost, there's a DELEG discussion on Mattermost, and so the minutes of that and the questions that were already addressed are in fact in a document that's linked there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Wes Hardiker, this time with my Internet Architecture Board hat on, as well as the potential BOF chair. Just as a reminder, the way the IETF works, this is not the accepted solution yet. Nothing, great work for the people that have been driving this forward. But once, it has not been adopted by a working group, it has not been adopted as a working group or, anything. So anything may change. Everybody hopefully knows how the IETF consensus process works, and this is a starting point. A lot of people, I've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks saying it's already done, right? They don't like it and it's already done. That's not how it works. So come to the BOF because it's your opportunity to give feedback, and come with alternate proposals. So it's already some that the DNS has always been extensible with alternate RR types in the first place, and some people would prefer that approach. I have no hats in that particular race. So.
All set from, okay, thank you.